Okay, welcome everyone. Um, okay. Jacob Lawrence is a wonderful colorist, as you can see. Um, you know, basically, what one of the things I wanted to say is someone asked a question last week toward the end of the webinar, and that question was, why am I choosing the artist that I'm choosing? And that has to do with upcoming shows or shows that have just passed that were in the area but we couldn't get to, like the Gerhard Richter. And Jacob Lawrence, for the first time in oh God, it's probably been 30 years, that the American Struggle series is going to be shown. Um, they don't have all the pieces, but it's going to be shown at the Metropolitan Museum, and it's going to feature these little scene pieces. This series was broken up soon after he did them. Basically, they were sold to a collector who sold them separately. So it really is a great opportunity. The Metropolitan is opening on Saturday, and it's going to be limited. They're limiting it to 25% of capacity, and you have to call, and I mean, you have to actually get timed tickets because they're not going to let people in without masks. They're doing all kinds of directional things in the museum and all that to keep us as safe as possible. So Lawrence's Struggle was originally conceived as a series that was going to chronicle the struggles of the American people to create a nation.
And Larry, we have a question already.
Okay, what's that?
Was Jacob's work in a show at the Jewish Museum last year? Do you know?
Not that I know of, no. There was a show, and I'll talk about that,
okay.
in 2015 at the Museum of Modern Art. But this is a different matter. So basically, this series is grappling with our democracy and what that means in relationship to people of color. I don't think there's anything much more relevant right now to be dealing with. So I'm going to move along. This piece was from another series that he did called This is Harlem. And basically it's all the street activity. It's wonderful, wacky. Look at the sizes of these people. Let me see if I can do a little zoom in. If we come in here and you start to look at the size of this dog that's walking this boy, and look at the size of the bus in relationship to the boy and the dog. Look at these little cars that are driving next to these people. This is a really wacky piece. It's wonderful. His sense of humor and playfulness is really terrific. And that will be there throughout all of his work. But he gets to some pretty serious business. So this is a self-portrait from 1977. He really thought of himself as an expressionist painter. Let's see. I'll do a little bio stuff on him. He was born in New Jersey in 1917. Died in 2000. His parents separated and were divorced in 1924. So he was living with his mother. They moved to Philadelphia. He was fostered for a period of time while she went to New York City to earn money. And basically, they reunited. He came to New York when he was 13, and they settled in Harlem, and that was a big deal for him. As a boy, he drew the patterns of things that he saw in his house. So basically, cloth and things like that. The culture that he grew up in was really out of the Great Migration. The Great Migration was I'll talk a lot more about that later, but basically there was a great movement from the South to the North during the First World War. The work in the northern industries really drew people out of the rural South. When he came to Harlem, his mother saw that he loved to draw patterns with crayons, so she got him into the Harlem. Let's see, what was that called? The Harlem Arts Center, and he began taking classes there from his young childhood. So let's see, and basically what he did was he absorbed and painted the shapes and the forms that he saw around him. The instructor that he had at the Harlem Community Arts Center just saw the talent in this boy right away and really supported him. His name was Charles Alston, who was also a really wonderful artist. As a teen, basically after he started going to the Harlem Community Arts Center, they encouraged him to go to the Metropolitan and look at art. So he looked at Giotto and basically appreciated the foreshortening and the flattening of forms and the expressive quality of the faces, and he picked up a lot on the linear elements of the composition. Not, it's not deep perspective. It's not what we're used to seeing in the high Renaissance, but it's that early, more shape-oriented and overlap that he got out of this stuff, and he was encouraged to pursue it. So again, the street life, the activity, the movements, his color, these browns and blacks with these really bright, rich colors bouncing through it. Quite a colorist. Let me see what I've got here. All right, okay. So in the context, the question is, where is this coming from? He was really influenced by a lot of the artists that were in Harlem. It was called the Harlem Renaissance at the time, and there were a lot of things that were moving around in the air at the time. I mean, basically, on your right is Milton Avery, and you can see the simplified forms, the big shapes, and all of that. This is stuff that was in the air at the time. On the left is another really wonderful artist, William Johnson, who actually did a lot of the series business, which Lawrence picked up on and pursued throughout his career. And then...
Oh, Larry, before you go on to the next,
yes.
Somebody said in Self-Portrait, which we saw before,
yes,
she likes the way the paintbrush is pointing at himself as to be actually painting himself.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting. And then somebody asked Roberta, was Matisse an influence on Lawrence? And did he paint from photographs or sketches that he made,
He,
or from life?
as
Those are two questions.
yes,
Matisse,
as far, number one, Matisse was through the influences that were around him. Okay, so if you look at the Charles Alston, who was his teacher at the Harlem Community Arts Center, you can see the colorist, cubist business that was going on. So Matisse, Cézanne, all of that influenced modernism in America, and he was very much influenced by that. It was in the air where he was. He was around a lot of artists who were talking about this stuff all the time. And on the right, you see Stuart Davis, and you see the flattening of forms and all of that. He ended up showing in a gallery that Stu Davis was part of a bit later on as he moved on in his career. So again, the vitality of the street, the action, the whimsy of these pieces is really important, and it's kind of the social context, the things that were going on around him really absorbed him, and he pulled that into his art. So he would do as many as 12 drawings for one panel before he would arrive at a composition that he wanted to work with. That answers that question. He did, as far as I know, he didn't work much from photographs, though I'm sure he used them for reference. I think for the most part, he did a lot of drawing and a lot of line drawing and things like that. So what I'm going to do now is move on to the first large historical series that he did, which is something which he repeated throughout his career. Basically, what he would do is do these long groups of pieces. He was basically a young man. He was 20 years old when he started doing this, and this. He heard about this fellow who was the leader of the slave revolt in Haiti, from some of the Haitian painters that were around him, and you know, he became very curious about this and did some research on it actually at the time it was called the 135th Street Library, but now it's known as the Schomburg Center. So he did a lot of research on these things, and he would do a whole series of drawings, you know, before he would go to the panels.
How big are these pieces?
They're relatively small. They're about 11.5 by 19 inches, but there's a series of 41 of them. And how he would do this is he would lay all 41 of them out. He would do the drawings for them. And basically he would go through with a color and work his way through all 41 of them and use that color in each of those panels before he would come back and start the next color. So he would mix up a color, and it's one of the ways that he found a kind of unity through each of these series that he would do. So it's a very interesting procedure that he would go through with these pieces. You know, there were also a lot of mural painters that were around. Yes.
Did he paint in oil too? Did he paint in oil?
No, these were all tempera, and he painted with acrylic later on in his life, but for the most part it was cassine, tempera, and gouache, which is opaque watercolor. So no, that was mostly what he painted with. He did murals and things like that. Now, what he used for those is another question that I don't have the answer to at the moment. But I think he also did, you know, he did a number of different mediums, but for the most part, it was this water-based medium that he stuck with.
Somebody commented on how vibrant the colors were. How did he preserve them? Do you know?
Yes. Well, now some of these reproductions I've got are these pieces, I believe, are after the fact pieces. These two are silk screens that he did from this series later on. That was back, actually, I believe it was in the 80s when he went back and redid these as silk screens. A lot of the early temper pieces are losing their color, are, you know, basically getting into fairly bad shape, though he used better materials as he got further along in his career. Remember, this is a 20-year-old kid that did these pieces. So, this is basically showing the revolution. There's a bunch of battle scenes and things like that. Toussaint was a very a highly cultured individual. He basically was a free black and came back to Haiti to help with the revolution. And he basically they were a very early republic because of his work, but he was duped into going to France and was arrested and killed. So,
did he write about his own work?
He did, and also and basically later on, I will have reference material. There's a whole series of interviews with him on each of the panels of the Migration series. If you go to the Phillips Collection website, you can there are short interviews with him that are like, you know, a minute or 2 minutes long on each panel, which is really fascinating. There are also interviews out there with him. Actually, Gates did an interview with him back in the I believe it was in the early 90s, and that's out there too, someplace floating around. And anyway, okay, The Life of Frederick Douglass was another one of the series pieces that he did. He did John Brown, and then he moved on to The Life of Harriet Tubman. And back in the day, you know, 1940, 1941, not too many people knew of the history of Harriet Tubman. So this series was quite enlightening to many people. And it's just, you know, this beautiful, you know, simplified, clear, crisp, graphic depiction of the struggle that she went through. And let's see, I'm gonna move on here. Okay. Sorry for the momentary delay, but now we're gonna move on to what is one of his best known series. The Migration series is basically, it really is about this wave of rural African Americans coming north, and he really conceived this piece out of the stories that he was hearing around him from his mother and his aunts and her friends who lived in this situation. So he knew secondhand about these experiences, but he also had the Schomburg Center and did a lot of research on this. So he would do as many as 12 drawings before he arrived at a, you know, a composition that he was satisfied with for these pieces. And he received a grant to do this series. So he could really take the time, and he rented a studio space and laid all 60 panels out and really worked his way through this whole thing. It took him, you know, a good year and a half, 2 years to do this series. And again, the notion of movement, of the exodus, of the idea of the challenge of all that, of the courage that it took to pick up and move along. And he kind of picked up on some of these themes out of his experience at the Metropolitan, seeing the pilgrimages and things like that, and thinking about, you know, the dynamics of what it looked like to have this whole group of people flowing through. So yes, the work was part of the thing that pushed these people to move north, but also the lynchings that were really, you know, after World War I, there was a rash of lynchings throughout the South when the black soldiers came back from World War I. It was epidemic proportions. So, you know, this was another thing which pushed them to move north. Although when they got to the north, it wasn't like their reception was all that great either. There were riots in Chicago and beatings and all of that went on. But this migration series brought great recognition, brought basically, he had been picked up by a gallery called the Downtown Gallery, which was actually showing a lot of the avant-garde. It was where Stuart Davis was showing. It was where a lot of the avant-garde artists of the time were showing. And the lady who ran the gallery did a show of this migration series, and a number of museums were vying for it, and the Museum of Modern Art and the Phillips Collection came together and basically each bought half of the series, with the understanding that they would bring them together and show them periodically. So this is really something that has been done. As far as I know, they've done it at least 3 times, and the last time was in 2015.
Larry, did he ever use human models?
Well, he used human models in that he conceived of these things from things that he saw on the street and action that he saw. Did he draw directly from the model? Yes, he did at times, but that was not relevant to the compositions that he was playing with these. So after he would do these series pieces, he would always come back to the street, always come back to things that he was seeing and experiencing around him. Constantly drawing and looking. Okay, so now I'm going to skip forward. I mean, basically, there's a during World War II, he was drafted into the what was it, the Coast Guard. And he acted as a basically a public relations liaison. He was on actually he was on two ships that were model ships that were integrated. And that was like really a big deal back then. There were not very many integrated ships at that time. So he grew in the ranks, was a petty officer, third class, whatever that means. I'm not sure. Maybe there's some Navy people out there who know what that means. But basically he was able to paint even on the ship and continued to work throughout. He continued. He did a victory series. He did a series. He actually became depressed after getting out of the Navy, and in 1949 he checked himself into a hospital for a period of time. He was deep in depression, and he painted the interior of the hospital. So there's a hospital series that he also did. But when he got out in the early 50s, he conceived of this idea of doing this series of the history of America and going from the pre-Revolutionary War up to the present time. How he conceived it was of being another 60 panels. Only 30 of those got painted. And what you see here are examples of some of what he did. These pieces are much more angular. They're much more. They suggest the struggle, that tension that's there, and basically think about the times that he was living in. The civil rights era and all of that was going on. And one of the other things that I wanted to go back and talk about is basically the Mexican muralists in the time in the 30s when he was cutting his teeth were very much part of the social fabric that the artists were involved in. So they saw this work, and so what he did was he would use quotations that he would find from his research, and rally Mohawks, bring out your axes and tell King George we'll pay no taxes on his foreign tea. It was and when you look at the composition of this Orozco section of a mural, and you look at the tension inside this Mohawk piece, you really see where that structure was there, and he picked up on that and carried it forward. Not that he was looking directly at this, but he was influenced on some level by it when he was a young man.
Larry, somebody commented that his figures are more assertive than they were before.
Yes. When you think about this time and you think about the civil rights movement and the McCarthy era that he was right in the middle of, Lawrence always had this social consciousness, this street consciousness. When he was walking the streets as a boy, there were the Garveyites who were out there, who were preaching to the people, saying, basically back to Africa. This is a white man's land. We need to leave here. There were communists that were standing on the street corners, spilling their guts. So all of this stuff was stuff that he saw, but in the mid 50s, the civil rights movement was so profoundly affecting him. And so, this struggle to form a more perfect union was something that was very important to him, and something that he wanted to bring into these pieces. This piece on the left is Washington crossing the Delaware, and there's no heroic stance of Washington standing in the prow of the ship. It's basically much more, we're all in this together, and we're pulling our way through really rough waters. I mean, this was in the 1950s, but we're still in some pretty rough waters today. So this piece speaks for itself. For we want freedom, and will have, for we have served this cruel land long enough. So he's just, really going into it at this stage. He did a whole series in the 60s that I'm not even showing because they're rougher territory than this even.
Somebody commented that this work seems like Picasso was an influence on him.
It's very much, one of the things that I said on this one is it's like Guernica on the Delaware here. The piece with the Hessians on the right is, you could see the whole thing that Picasso captured in the 30s in the Spanish Civil War. So yes, he was very influenced by the Cubists through the influences that were around him.
Larry, how is he influenced? I mean, what would you say specifically in this painting was the influence of the Cubists?
Well, I mean, you can see the angularity, you can see the flattening of the forms, you can see a lot of Cubist devices with shallow space using shape rather than modeling to portray the image and to move the eye. He's also, just a great colorist.
Can I, one other question. Did he personally feel that he made a difference in terms of education? Wait, I just lost it. An education, in terms of education, people about the past, educating people about the past and the current situation in the 50s and 60s?
I would say that the Migration series had a very profound effect. It was very well received. It was shown extensively. It was actually in one of the big magazines at the time. They did a full spread of all 60 panels of the Migration series. So that is something which, one of the reasons that Schomburg put together the Schomburg collection, he was a bibliophile and historian, and he went to one of his teachers and said, why is it that I can't find anything on Black Americans? And the teacher said to him, you have no history. And that drove this man to collect volumes and volumes on Black history and put this thing together. So the Schomburg collection is this huge collection of information that goes back centuries.
Was he recognized on a national level?
You mean Jacob Lawrence?
Yes.
Absolutely. He was one of the best known, along with Romar Bearden. Jacob Lawrence was one of the two top rated Black artists in the country.
I see.
So in the 80s, he did this whole series of builders. You know, he was always fascinated by tools when he was a kid. He loved to look at them. He loved to play around with them. And, you know, if you're gonna look for a Matisse influence, this is pretty Matisse. But also,
Larry, you're going out. Is
there's
something
Stu
happening?
Davis in here. You know, says connection is unstable. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
But you
Okay.
start from the beginning because we lost you.
All right. So the Builders series was basically, if you're looking for a Matisse influence, these are very Matisse, but it's also Stuart Davis, who was really somebody who Lawrence knew very well.
How do you? What makes them so Matisse and Stuart Lawrence?
Well, it's these big shapes, big unmodulated shapes, the big interaction of color, simplified forms, and really essential design that you know, this abstract design that works throughout the pieces.
Somebody mentioned that it feels like a collage.
Yeah, very much. You know, that they're very flat surfaces. That's really how he conceived them. Let's see. And then this Genesis series was one that he did toward the end of his life. They're really, you know, again, the big shapes, this business of simplified form. It's really kind of going for a calling it the Genesis series. He's toward the end of his life. He's going back in his own personal history to the sermons that he heard as a boy. He, you know, basically would go to church in Harlem and hear Adam Clayton Powell Sr., who would, you know, raise the rafters with his spiritual dynamism, shall we say. Now, you know, there's a lot more to this. You can go to the Museum of Modern Art. They have a series of talks on him. And actually, let me go here. And if you go to the Phillips collection, you can hook in there, and they'll go through the entire migration series, and he talks about each panel, which is really interesting to hear him and see him. You know, Lawrence was a really exceptional artist. He was supported very much by the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance was really a place that fostered him as a youth, and it nurtured him. He really, you know, throughout that time stayed in that atmosphere where there was the music, there was the artwork, there was all kinds of stuff. The literary world was really very, very profound in that period of time. Between 1918 and about 38 was really the time span for the Harlem Renaissance. So he really came up through that atmosphere. And, you know, basically he and his wife Gwendolyn moved. She was also a really wonderful artist. Um, they were invited out to Washington, and he taught from 1970 until late in the 80s, early 90s out there at Washington State. So, again, if you want more information on him, you can go to the Phillips Collection, you can go to the Museum of Modern Art. They also have live active stuff, and you can go and see more of his work.
One comment says that he has pieces in the National Art Gallery.
Oh, yes, he has pieces in the National Gallery. He's got pieces at the Whitney. He's got pieces in all the major museums. The Metropolitan has a really wonderful collection of his stuff. The Ronalda House of American Art. Actually, the White House has some of his work. I don't know if it's on the wall right now. Brooklyn Museum. He is really in major collections throughout America.
Yeah. Two other questions.
Yeah.
Somebody said in comments rather, in the Genesis series, she said it's such a soft feeling showing his thought about life and the hereafter.
Yes.
In that Genesis series that we saw. And then somebody said in the picture, in the image right now, that one of the figures appears to have a halo.
Yeah, I know. That goes back to the old days at the Metropolitan Museum. He's actually wearing a hat, but it could be the Last Supper. We got the fishes and loaves there.
And somebody asked, has there been a U.S. stamp produced, a stamp, a letter stamp produced with his art?
I don't know the answer to that, but it would be a good one.
Yeah.
There are many images that would really, really fit that bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, unless there are other questions, that's more or less it for this week. Next week, we're going to do basically Joan Mitchell, who is having there's a retrospective of her work, which is touring the United States and is going to end up at the Guggenheim Museum, I believe, in 2022. But it could be earlier than that. I'm not 100% sure about the dates. And of course, given what's going on with the world at the moment, we don't know anything. But, hopefully we will be seeing her work soon.
Also, another comment, his work was in the Hudson River Museum in Yonkers.
Oh, sure.
Several years ago.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. He's everywhere.
He certainly is. I never knew about him.
Yeah.
Fabulous stuff. The colors are just exquisite.
Yes.
Exquisite. Yeah. Okay.
All
Anything
right.
else, Larry? All right. Thank you all for coming.
That's it.
Wait, I'll put myself back on video. Thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you on the 9th. We have a book discussion group and Cliff Tisdale about other artists. So terrific. Everybody seemed lots of thank yous, and we'll be doing a talk every Friday at 2:00. So we're here. I hope you'll be here, safe and well. Stay safe. Stay well. Bye, everyone.